Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Scott with Keeping It Real Bass Fishing. Appreciate you joining the video today. Hope you stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. Today we're going to talk about lures that I recommend, my top 3 to top 5 lures to use this time of year pond fishing. All right guys, like I say, we're going to talk today about fishing ponds this time of year. We're in August, middle of August, temperatures in the 80s, in the 90s, and I call it the dog days of summer. And you can catch bass, and you can catch big bass, this time of year if you fish long enough and hard enough and you're willing to try to get out there and find them. But now, if you're going pond fish, it's what we're talking about today. It's a good time to catch some big bass. What I have discovered with ponds is this time of year, especially because the water gets so warm, and a lot of times ponds are very shallow, and sometimes their food source can get limited as well, and so they have a tendency to want to roam around the banks in the shallow water. And most people think they're out in the deeper water of the pond, and they want to try to get into the deepest part of the pond and try to catch fish, which is okay. If you some ponds you can throw all the way across, you can fish out that far. Other ones are bigger, you can't. But if you'll look in the shallow water and around the banks, or try to walk around the banks but don't spook the fish, pay attention to the shallower water, especially if there's any clarity to the water. You'll see some bass, a good sized bass. You'll see them roaming around because they're looking for food. Because them big bass, they had to have a good diet to keep them sustained. But once they eat a good diet, they don't continue eating, for a while to that digest. Now they may, out of reaction, eat something, but they're not going to go, prowling for food. So that's what they'll do. I have discovered in the summertime. They look around in the shallow areas. I've walked right up on them at the edge of the water and looked down. There'd be a bass in the water just barely enough to cover his back, his fin, his top fin would be sticking out of the water. And he's in his eyes, he's looking straight up at me. I mean, he's like right there. And I've seen him that close. And you just got to look for them. And when you find them like that, that's the trick, is trying to catch them, right? Always. Well, you want to try some different things in every pond that depending on the pond. If you're in a pond that's full of grass and full of maybe lily pads, or some what we call just the muck, so it's real thick and all that crap that grows on top of these ponds. Sometimes you're gonna have to throw something weedless. The fish are still in there. You obviously throw a frog, a weedless frog. You can, or maybe you could punch it and get a worm down in there, or creature bait, crawdad, something down in between there, and just even a good worm, a long worm with a long curly tail on it, works good in that as well. You can punch through it and throw out there and just let it go to the bottom and jig up and down in those areas, because they'll get up underneath that stuff and hiding in that shade, and you can pull them out of there. But you're going to need a good rod and some good line and equipment to get them out of that mess. But all ponds don't have that stuff where you have to go punching, or you have no option other than just throw maybe a frog or something weedless, so you can fish through it, try to catch some fish. There's ponds all around here that don't have anything. There's no grass, there's hardly no laydowns, there's none of that muck growing on top, no lily pads. It's just clear water or semi-stained water. And the reason I mention that is that depending on, you know, how you want to fish, I guess if you want to go out and find ponds that are full of the muck and the lily pads and the grass, and you want to go out just throwing a frog all day and punching through trying to catch and jerk something out, then those ponds, you know, if you know where they're at, can produce some big fish in those shaded areas underneath that stuff, but it can be a challenge to fish it. And if you want to find ponds that are pretty clear, like I was mentioning, you know, you can throw a variety of stuff in there. You know, you can throw anything from a shallow running crankbait, you know, to a spinner bait, to top water, jigs, you know, swim baits, chatterbaits. You can throw about anything you want, you know, in those ponds there, kind of like you do at a reservoir, I guess I'm trying to say, at the big water, as I like to call it. So, you know, I guess it's how they call there's different ponds out there with different types of structures. And out of those ponds, the ones that I have found that I've caught the biggest bass out of over the years, and I've fished a lot of them and caught quite a large amount of big bass out of them. For you guys that have been asking, I look for ponds that are, you know, it's got clear water. When I mean clear water, I mean it's got water that you can fish. That maybe has some good vegetation on the bottom, or some grass around the banks, or some laydowns, or stumps. It's got some structure around the banks and things of that nature. I don't want to go fish a pond that's so full of muck that all I'm going to do is be cleaning my lure every time I cast, because I just don't enjoy that, and you may, but I don't. So that's the kind of ponds I look for, and I have found that, like I say, at this time of year, the water's got warmer. A lot of times the water's down a little bit. And the bait fish are done hatched out in there, if there is any, and probably most of them is gobbled up by all these bass. They'll eat them up pretty quick, but just depending on how full the lake, I mean the pond is of bass, and actually how many spawns of bait fish they've had. For an example, there's a pond that's over here near the house that I go fish once in a while. I hardly ever see any bait fish in it, because there's so many bass in there, and the bass, I mean, large bass. I've never seen anything in there, you know, less than 3 or 4 pounds, and I've caught 8s and 10s out of it, you know, repetitively, and it's just, and don't see a lot of bait fish swimming around, moving around in that water. And the only explanation I can figure is because all those big bass are eating them up. And so that tells me, if that's the case, it's probably the same thing in a lot of ponds that produce and have big bass in them. So they're going to be scavenging around the areas that are shallow looking for food. If it's a frog, or, you know, lizards or bugs or bait fish, all the brim, maybe crappie, different things that's in that pond that they're accustomed to eating. And that's what you got to discover. You got to find out what it is that they are accustomed to eating and what's in there. And that's what you want to try to imitate. If it's bluegill, then you want to throw something that's going to imitate a bluegill. You could throw a swim jig, you know, that looks like the brim color. You can actually throw shallow running crankbait if you can throw it without it getting hung up in the bottom, or trailer hooks grabbing. A lot of times it runs across the bottom, and the bottoms and ponds are usually really dirty with, you know, leaves or whatever's in the bottom, and it just constantly, you know, dragging it up off the bottom, and it's hard to throw crankbait in ponds a lot of times because they just ain't deep enough, and they don't have real hard clay bottoms or rocky bottoms. Some ponds are deep enough where you can and throw shallow crankbaits. So it's hard to throw a crankbait in a pond that imitates a brim, unless you, like I say, have a deeper pond and a really shallow running plug of some kind of crankbait, I should say, that imitates or looks like a brim. Some ponds have crappie in them, you know, so you can throw, and it might not have shad in the pond. And a lot of times, most ponds I see don't have shad in the pond, just minnows, you know. And the minnows are just the baby bass swimming around, and frogs, which are naturally in the pond, and maybe lizards and things of that nature. So, you know, worms do good in a pond, the lizards do good in a pond, fluke do good in a pond, floating worms do good in a pond, spinnerbaits do good in a pond. But you really want to throw more, in a pond you want to throw a 3/8 spinnerbait. I wouldn't recommend throwing anything bigger than that, unless it's a big pond, which could come into, I mean, I should say could be a small lake instead of a pond, depending on how big it is. You could throw a 1/2 ounce spinnerbait, a double wheel leaf, something of that nature, and probably get by with it, but you'd have to crank it pretty fast and keep it up on top, and you know, so you're not getting down in the bottom of the pond and things of that nature. Depending on the pond there again, you know. And plus, to me, it's not so much that it being a problem with the 1/2 ounce spinnerbait. It's more or less the weight, because when you're throwing it, it obviously crashing in the water, and the waters are shallow enough, and fish in a pond are easily spooked. Yeah, and it's everything crashing in, and you're throwing it right there close to where they're swimming. You're just going to, where they're swimming around at, you're going to spook them, and they're going to swim off, and then they'll come back. But then now they're more of a alert because you already spooked them. So I throw I go to a 3/8 ounce if I'm going to throw a spinnerbait, and usually it's even a double wheel leaf, or maybe I have one particular I like to throw, which is Colorado and Indiana blade combo 3/8. And so that the spinnerbait will work well. You can change colors too. I have found that you can change colors with the spinnerbait, which I'm going to go through these different spinnerbaits and show you those. Also, some other things, other lures that we've talked about, and show you what those are, so that you kind of have an idea of what we're talking about. But those are good lures in the ponds. Top water, don't let me forget about that. Top water can be really good in a pond. I have found that a whopper plopper works really good in ponds, particularly the yellow whopper plopper. I don't know why I've thrown all the other colors, and I haven't really caught no bass on them, but that yellow one, I've caught a lot of bass on that whopper plopper. And they make a little small whopper plopper, they make a medium size, and they make a larger size. I usually throw the medium size whopper plopper. And frogs work good too in ponds, and there's 100 different kind of frogs. So I mean, usually I find that there again, some reason even a green or yellow frogs seem to work best for me. And the green are more of a, not dark green, like a mix between the yellow and green. And that yellow, and I find that yellow for some reason in ponds is a very good color. That fish, the bass, you know, they just seem to like that yellow better. I've had more success on catching bass on yellow. You know, I'm talking about top water, like if it's a frog or whopper plopper, even a buzzbait. Yeah, and buzzbaits can be good in a pond. Like I say, you know, your poppers, spook, those things, top water lure like such, even small jerk baits can be good. If this time of year, you can take a small jerk bait and just jerk it real fast across the top of the water, and it'll work good in a pond. And those are some lures that I've thrown a lot and been very successful on catching big bass in these ponds. But I will say don't forget about the chatterbait, because I have caught a lot of bass on the chatterbait as well in the ponds. And you say, well, Scott, you caught a lot of fish on a lot of lures. Those lures are, you know, kind of common, what we all throw. Well, they might be true, but if you don't fish ponds a lot and you've been fishing them and you're not been catching much fish or been successful in the ponds, you know, you want to try the lures I've talked about, but there's different places you want to look. You know, don't always throw out in the middle and just throwing out into the middle of the pond and cranking back. The strike zone this time of year, like I say, it's going to be close to the bank. So if you walk around the pond, stay close to the side of the bank, throw it parallel the bank. Throw down the bank about 3 or 4 feet out from the edge of the bank, something of that nature, and just fish the edge like that. If you can get all the way around that pond, walk all the way around it, paralleling it. And you should pick you up a fish or two. And then you can try other things in other areas of the pond. You know, you may go on the shallow end and just fan cast it and work it until you figure out if there's any fish in there or not. And then you can go to the deeper end, do the same thing. But you got to kind of work the pond and cover all the areas that need to be hit in the pond, and all the different lures that you know will work in that pond. And it's like a plan. You got to organize yourself and have a plan. Going to the pond, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going there, I have a plan already. I have my stuff tied on that I know that I'm going to throw for that particular pond. And I'm going, like I said, I'm going to parallel the bank all the way around it if I can, and throw the different lures that I think should work that time of day. And then I'm going to move to the shallower end and fish that. I'm going to fan cast and fish it out. And then I may move around the pond, fish the deeper end. But I'm going to have me on 4 or 5 different lures that I know the fish will eat, and out of the ones I told you. And if I find them, discover through the process I just explained, they want to eat, say it may be a spinnerbait. So I caught one on spinnerbait, catch another on spinnerbait. Well, I know they're going to eat that spinnerbait today. That's obviously something they want to eat. Why should I put that down and throw a worm or throw a topwater or throw a jig? You know, why should I do that when I already discovered and found something they will eat? It's kind of dumb, I think. So I'm going to keep feeding them that spinnerbait, because I've done caught 2, so that tells me, hey, they're hungry enough, they're going to feed on it, that's what they want, I'm going to give it to them. So if 1 or 2 is going to eat it, the rest of them will. I found that out over years with my experience as well. So, you know, that's a good tip, is if you start catching fish on something, don't change up. You know, hopefully you don't lose it in the process of when you're fishing that day, because that's happened too. You might have another one in your box, or maybe even have another one in the box, and it be brand new, and you put it on and it's an identical lure and they won't touch it for some reason. That's strange, but it does, and it has happened. I'm sure it's happened to you. But, you know, I'm going to feed them whatever it is, I'm just using a spinnerbait for an example. And that's a good tip for a pond. Just remember, you know, so if they're going to eat that, I'm going to keep feeding it to them, you know, for as long as you know, if I'm going to fish that day. And if I fished it for, you know, I don't know, an hour or so longer after I've caught a fish and I ain't caught another fish on it, after I done threw it 100 times, you know, and fished it in all the different areas around the pond, and they just not touching it anymore, then I may lay it down and pick up something else. Hey guys, those are some good tips. I hope they've helped you on how to attack these ponds, you know, and how to fish the ponds. And I went through it fast, but I did try to explain it best I could for you. I'm going to put together some of these plugs that we're talking about in another video, and we'll go over the plugs that I'm talking about that I mentioned that I feel like are good lures to use in these ponds this time of year, and being in August and middle of August and it's dog days, man. It's like, it's hot, it's muggy hot, it's just miserable in this heat. Scott with Keeping It Real Bass Fishing. If you would, please hit that like button, and if you enjoyed the video, hit that subscribe button for us. We appreciate it. As always, keep it real. Let's go get that big one. Take care.